"Come now, my dear little stars," said Mother Moon, "and I will tell you the Christmas story." Every morning for a week before Christmas, Mother Moon used to call all the little stars around her and tell them a story. It was always the same story, but the stars never wearied of it. It was the story of the Christmas star, the Star of Bethlehem. When Mother Moon had finished the story, the little stars always said, "And the star is shining still, isn't it, Mother Moon, even if you can't see it?" And Mother Moon would answer, "Yes, my dears, only now it shines for men's hearts instead of their eyes." Then the stars would bid the Mother Moon good night and put on their little blue nightcaps and go to bed in the sky chamber. For the stars' bedtime is when people down on earth are beginning to waken and see that it is morning. But that particular morning, when the little stars said good night and went quietly away, one golden star still lingered beside Mother Moon. "What is the matter, my little star?" asked the Mother Moon. "Why don't you go with your little sisters?" "Oh, Mother Moon," said the golden star, "I am so sad. I wish I could shine for someone's heart like that star of wonder that you tell us about." "Why, aren't you happy up here in the sky country?" asked Mother Moon. "Yes, I've been very happy," said the star, "but tonight it seems just as if I must find some heart to shine for." "Then, if that is so," said Mother Moon, "the time has come, my little star, for you to go through the wonder entry." "The wonder entry? What is that?" asked the star, but the Mother Moon made no answer. Rising, she took the little star by the hand and led it to a door that it had never seen before. The Mother Moon opened the door, and there was a long, dark entry. At the far end was shining a little speck of light. "What is this?" asked the star. "It is the wonder entry, and it is through this that you must go to find a heart where you belong," said the Mother Moon. Then the little star was afraid. It longed to go through the entry, as it had never longed for anything before, and yet it was afraid and clung to the Mother Moon. But very gently, almost sadly, the Mother Moon drew her hand away. "Go, my child," she said. Then, wondering and trembling, the little star stepped into the wonder entry, and the door of the sky house closed behind it. The next thing the star knew, it was hanging in a toy shop with a whole row of other stars, blue and red and silver. It itself was gold. The shop smelled of evergreen and was full of Christmas shoppers, men and women and children. But of them all, the star looked at no one but a little boy standing in front of the counter. For as soon as the star saw the child, it knew that he was the one to whom it belonged. The little boy was standing beside a sweet-faced woman in a long black veil, and he was not looking at anything particular. The star shook and trembled on the string that held it, because it was afraid lest the child would not see it, or lest, if he did, he would not know it as his star. The lady had a number of toys on the counter before her, and she was saying, "Now I think we have presents for everyone. There's the doll for Lou, and the game for Nellie, and the music box for May, and then the rocking horse and the sled." Suddenly the little boy caught her by the arm. "Oh, Mother," he said. He had seen the star. "Well, what is it, darling?" asked the lady. "Oh, Mother, just see that star up there. I wish, oh, I do wish I had it." "Oh, my dear, we have so many things for the Christmas tree," said the mother. "Yes, I know, but I do want the star," said the child. "Very well," said the mother's son, "and we will take that too." So the star was taken down to the place where it hung, and wrapped up in a piece of paper, and all the while it thrilled with joy, for now it belonged to the little boy. It was not until the afternoon before Christmas, when the tree was being decorated, that the golden star was unwrapped and taken out from the paper. "Here is something else," said the sweet-faced lady. "You must hang this on the tree. Paul took such a fancy to it that I have to get it done. He will never be satisfied unless we hang it on too." "Oh, yes," said some of those who was helping to decorate the tree. "We will hang it here on the very top." So the little star hung on the highest branch of the Christmas tree. That evening all the candles were lighted on the Christmas tree, and there were so many that they fairly dazzled the eyes, and the gold and silver balls and berries and glass fruits shone in the twinkle of light, and high above them all shone a golden star. At 7 o'clock the bell was rung. Then golden doors could ring, and the Christmas tree stood for grown-up people and a crowd of children in a tree.
Hello. No sound, huh? Hold on. Hold on. Something was wrong. Let me see.
Short stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fireside Christmas Short Stories by Various. Christmas at Red Butte by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Recording by Lynn Thompson. Of course Santa Claus will come, said Jimmy Martin confidently. Jimmy was 10, and at 10 it is easy to be confident. Why, he's got to come, because it is Christmas Eve, and he always has to come. You know that, twins. Yes, the twins knew it, and, cheered by Jimmy's superior wisdom, their doubts passed away. There had been one terrible moment when Theodora had sighed and told them they mustn't be too much disappointed if Santa Claus did not come this year, because the crops had been poor, and he mightn't have had enough presents to go around. That doesn't make any difference to Santa Claus, scoffed Jimmy. You know as well as I do, Theodora Prentice, that Santa Claus is rich, whether the crops fail or not. They failed 3 years ago, before Father died, but Santa Claus came all the same. Probably you don't remember it, twins, because you were too little, but I do. Of course he'll come, so don't you worry a mite, and he'll bring my skates and your dolls. He knows we're expecting him, Theodora, because we wrote him a letter last week and threw it up the chimney. And there'll be candy and nuts, of course, and Mother's gone to town to buy a turkey. I tell you, we're going to have a ripping Christmas. We don't use such slangy words about it, Jimmy boy, sighed Theodora. She couldn't bear to dampen their hopes any further, and perhaps Aunt Elizabeth might manage it if the colt sold well. But Theodora had her painful doubts, and she sighed again as she looked out of the window far down the trail that wound across the prairie, red-lighted by the declining sun of the short wintry afternoon. Do people always sigh like that when they get to be 16? Asked Jimmy curiously. You didn't sigh like that when you were only 15, Theodora. I wish you wouldn't. It makes me feel funny. And it's not a nice kind of funniness either. It's a bad habit I've got into lately, said Theodora, trying to laugh. Old folks are dull sometimes, you know, Jimmy boy. 16 is awful old, isn't it? Said Jimmy reflectively. I'll tell you what I'm going to do when I'm 16, Theodora. I'm going to pay off the mortgage and buy Mother a silk dress and a piano for the twins. Won't that be elegant? I'll be able to do that because I'm a man. Of course, if I was only a girl, I couldn't. I hope you'll be a good, kind, brave man and a real help to your mother, said Theodora softly, sitting down before the cosy fire and lifting the fat little twins into her lap. Oh, I'll be good to her, never you fear, assured Jimmy, squatting comfortably down on the little fur rug before the stove, the skin of a coyote his father had killed 4 years ago. I believe in being good to your mother when you've got only the one. Now, tell us a story, Theodora. A real jolly story, you know, with lots of fighting in it. Only please don't kill anybody. I like to hear about fighting, but I like to have all the people come out alive. Theodora laughed and began a story about the real rebellion of '85, a story which had the double merit of being true and exciting at the same time. It was quite dark when she finished, and the twins were nodding, but Jimmy's eyes were wide open and sparkling. "That was great," he said, drawing a long breath. "Tell us another." "No, it's bedtime for you all," said Theodora firmly. "One story at a time is my rule, you know." "But I want to sit up till Mother comes home," objected Jimmy. "You can't. She may be very late, for she said she would have to wait to see Mr. Porter. Besides, you don't know what time Santa Claus might come, if he comes at all. If he were to drive along and see you children up, instead of being sound asleep in bed, he might go right on and never call at all." This argument was too much for Jimmy. "All right, we'll go. But we have to hang up our stockings first. Twins, get yours." The twins toddled off in great excitement and brought back their Sunday stockings, which Jimmy proceeded to hang along the edge of the mantel shelf. This done, they all trooped obediently off to bed. Theodora gave another sigh and seated herself at the window where she could watch the moonlit prairie for Mrs. Martin's homecoming and knit at the same time. I am afraid that you will think from all the sighing Theodora was doing that she was a very melancholy and despondent young lady. You couldn't think anything more unlike the real Theodora. She was the jolliest, bravest girl of 16 in all Saskatchewan, as her shining brown eyes and rosy dimpled cheeks would have told you. And her sighs were not on her own account, but simply for fear the children were going to be disappointed. She knew that they would be almost heartbroken if Santa Claus did not come, and that this would hurt the patient, hard-working little mother more than all else. 5 years before this, Theodora had come to live with Uncle George and Aunt Elizabeth in the little log house at Red Butte. Her own mother had just died, and Theodora had only her big brother Donald left, and Donald had Klondike fever. The Martins were poor, but they had gladly made room for their little niece, and Theodora had lived there ever since, her aunt's right-hand girl, and the beloved playmate of the children. They had been very happy until Uncle George's death 2 years before this Christmas Eve. But since then, there had been hard times in the little log house, and though Mrs. Martin and Theodora did their best, it was a woefully hard task to make both ends meet, especially this year when the crops had been poor. Theodora and her aunt had made every sacrifice possible for the children's sake, and at least Jimmy and the twins had not felt the pinch very severely yet. At 7, Mrs. Martin's bells jingled at the door, and Theodora flew out. "Go right in and get warm, Auntie," she said briskly. "I'll take Ned away and unharness him." "It's a bitterly cold night," said Mrs. Martin wearily. There was a note of discouragement in her voice that struck dismay to Theodora's heart. "I'm afraid it means no Christmas for the children tomorrow," she thought sadly, as she led Ned away to the stable. When she returned to the kitchen, Mrs. Martin was sitting by the fire, her face in her chilled hand, sobbing convulsively. "Auntie! Oh, Auntie, don't!" exclaimed Theodora impulsively. It was such a rare thing to see her plucky, resolute little aunt in tears. "You're cold and tired. I'll have a nice cup of tea for you in a trice." "No, it isn't that," said Mrs. Martin brokenly. "It was seeing those stockings hanging there. Theodora, I couldn't get a thing for the children. Not a single thing. Mr. Porter would only give $40 for the colt, and when all the bills were paid, there was barely enough left for such necessaries as we must have. I suppose I ought to feel thankful I could get those, but the thought of the children's disappointment tomorrow is more than I can bear. It would have been better to have told them long ago, but I kept building on getting more for the colt. Well, it's weak and foolish to give way like this. We'd better both take a cup of tea and go to bed. It will save fuel." When Theodora went up to her little room, her face was very thoughtful. She took a small box from her table and carried it to the window. In it was a very pretty little gold locket hung on a narrow blue ribbon. Theodora held it tenderly in her fingers and looked out over the moonlit prairie with a very sober face. Could she give up her dear locket? The locket Donald had given her just before he started for the Klondike. She had never thought she could do such a thing. It was almost the only thing she had to remind her of Donald. Handsome, merry, impulsive, warm-hearted Donald, who had gone away 4 years ago with a smile on his bonny face and splendid hope in his heart. "Here's a locket for you, gift o' God," he had said gaily. He had such a dear, loving habit of calling her by the beautiful meaning of her name. A lump came into Theodora's throat as she remembered it. "I couldn't afford a chain too, but when I come back I'll bring you a rope of Klondike nuggets for it." Then he had gone away. For 2 years letters had come from him regularly. Then he wrote that he had joined a prospecting party to a remote wilderness. After that was silence, deepening into anguish of suspense that finally ended in hopelessness. A rumour came that Donald Prentice was dead. None had returned from the expedition he had joined. Theodora had long ago given up all hope of ever seeing Donald again. Hence her locket was doubly dear to her. But Aunt Elizabeth had always been so good and loving and kind to her. Could she not make the sacrifice for her sake? Yes, she could and would. Theodora flung up her head with a gesture that meant decision. She took out of the locket the bits of hair, her mother's and Donald's, which it contained. Perhaps a tear or two fell as she did so, and then hastily donned her warmest cap and wraps. It was only 3 miles to Spencer. She could easily walk it in an hour, and, as it was Christmas Eve, the shops would be open late. She must walk, for Ned could not be taken out again, and the mare's foot was sore. Besides, Aunt Elizabeth must not know until it was done. As stealthily as if she were bound on some nefarious errand, Theodora slipped downstairs and out of the house. The next minute she was hurrying along the trail in the moonlight. The great dazzling prairie was around her, the mystery and splendour of the northern night all about her. It was very calm and cold, but Theodora walked so briskly that she kept warm. The trail from Red Butte to Spencer was a lonely one. Mr. Lurgan's house halfway to town was the only dwelling on it. When Theodora reached Spencer, she made her way at once to the only jewellery store the little town contained. Mr. Benson, its owner, had been a friend of her uncle's, and Theodora felt sure that he would buy her locket. Nevertheless, her heart beat quickly, and her breath came and went uncomfortably fast as she went in. Suppose he wouldn't buy it? Then there would be no Christmas for the children at Red Butte. "Good evening, Miss Theodora," said Mr. Benson briskly. "What can I do for you?" "I'm afraid I'm not a very welcome sort of customer, Mr. Benson," said Theodora with an uncertain smile. "I want to sell, not buy. Will you buy this locket?" Mr. Benson pursed up his lips, took up the locket and examined it. "Well, I don't often buy second-hand stuff," he said after some reflection. "But I don't mind obliging you, Miss Theodora. I'll give you $4 for this trinket." Theodora knew the locket had cost a great deal more than that, but $4 would get what she wanted, and she dared not ask for more. In a few minutes the locket was in Mr. Benson's possession, and Theodora, with 4 crisp new bills in her purse, was hurrying to the toy store. Half an hour later she was on her way back to Red Butte, with as many parcels as she could carry. Jimmy's skates, 2 lovely dolls for the twins, packages of nuts and candy, and a nice plump turkey. Theodora beguiled her lonely tramp by picturing the children's joy in the morning. About a quarter of a mile past Mr. Lurgan's house, the trail curved suddenly about a bluff of poplars. As Theodora rounded the turn, she halted in amazement. Almost at her feet, the body of a man was lying across the road. He was clad in a big fur coat and had a fur cap pulled well down over his forehead and ears. Almost all of him that could be seen was a full, bushy beard. Theodora had no idea who he was or where he had come from, but she realized that he was unconscious and that he would speedily freeze to death if help were not brought. The footprints of a horse galloping across the prairie suggested a fall and a runaway, but Theodora did not waste time in speculation. She ran back at full speed to Mr. Lurgan's and roused the household. In a few minutes, Mr. Lurgan and his son had hitched a horse to a wood sleigh and hurried down the trail to the unfortunate man. Theodora, knowing that her assistance was not needed and that she ought to get home as quickly as possible, went on her way as soon as she had seen the stranger in safekeeping. When she reached the little log house, she crept in, cautiously put the children's gifts in their stockings, placed the turkey on the table where Aunt Elizabeth would see it first thing in the morning, and then slipped off to bed, a very weary but very happy girl. The joy that reigned in the little log house the next day more than repaid Theodora for her sacrifice. "Whoopee! Didn't I tell you that Santa Claus would come all right?" shouted the delighted Jimmy. "Oh, what splendid skates!" The twins hugged their dolls in silent rapture, but Aunt Elizabeth's face was the best of all. Then the dinner had to be prepared, and everybody had a hand in that. Just as Theodora, after a grave peep into the oven, had announced that the turkey was done, a sleigh dashed around the house. Theodora flew to answer the knock at the door, and there stood Mr. Lurgan and a big, bewhiskered, fur-coated fellow whom Theodora recognised as a stranger she had found on the trail. But was he a stranger? There was something oddly familiar in those merry brown eyes. Theodora felt herself growing dizzy. "Donald!" she gasped. "Oh, Donald!" And then she was in the big fellow's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Donald it was indeed, and then followed half an hour, during which everybody talked at once, and the turkey would have been burnt to a crisp had it not been for the presence of mind of Mr. Lurgan, who, being the least excited of them all, took it out of the oven and set it on the back of the stove. "To think that it was you last night, and that I never dreamed it!" exclaimed Theodora. "Oh, Donald, if I hadn't gone to town!" "I'd have frozen to death, I'm afraid," said Donald soberly. "I got into Spencer on the last train last night. I felt that I must come right out. I couldn't wait till morning, but there wasn't a team to be got for love or money. It was Christmas Eve and all the livery rigs were out. So I came on horseback. Just by that bluff something frightened my horse, and he shied violently. I was half asleep and thinking of my little sister, and I went off like a shot. I suppose I struck my head against a tree. Anyway, I knew nothing more until I came to in Mr. Lurgan's kitchen. I wasn't much hurt, feel none the worse of it, except for a sore head and shoulder. But, oh, gift of God, how you have grown. I can't realise that you are the little sister I left 4 years ago. I suppose you have been thinking I was dead." "Yes, and oh, Donald, where have you been?" "Well, I went way up north with a prospecting party. We had a tough time the first year, I can tell you, and some of us never came back. We weren't in a country where post offices were lying around loose either, you see. Then, at last, just as we were about giving up in despair, we struck it rich. I brought a snug little pile home with me, and things are going to look up in this log house, gift to God. There'll be no more worrying for you dear people over mortgages." "I'm so glad, for Auntie's sake," said Theodora, with shining eyes. "But, oh, Donald, it's best of all just to have you back. I'm so perfectly happy that I don't know what to do or say." "Well, I think you might have dinner," said Jimmy in an injured tone. "The turkey's getting stone cold, and I'm most starving. I just can't stand it another minute." So, with a laugh, they all sat down to the table and ate the merriest Christmas dinner the little log house had ever known. End of Christmas at Red Butte by Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Fireside Christmas Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fireside Christmas Short Stories by Various. The Heavenly Christmas Tree by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I am a novelist, and I suppose I have made up this story. I write, I suppose, though I know for a fact that I have made it up, but yet I keep fancying that it must have happened somewhere at some time, that it must have happened on Christmas Eve in some great town in a time of terrible frost. I have a vision of a little boy, 6 years old or even younger. This boy woke up that morning in a cold, damp cellar. He was dressed in a sort of little dressing gown and was shivering with cold. There was a cloud of white steam from his breath, and sitting on a box in the corner, he blew the steam out of his mouth and amused himself in his stillness watching it float away. But he was terribly hungry. Several times that morning he went up to the plank bed where his sick mother was lying on a mattress as thin as a pancake, with some sort of bundle under her head for a pillow. How had she come here? She must have come with her boy from some other town and suddenly fallen ill. The landlady who let the corners had been taken 2 days before to the police station. The lodgers were out and about as the holiday was so near, and the only one left had been lying for the last 24 hours dead drunk, not having waited for Christmas. In another corner of the room, a wretched old woman of 80, who had once been a children's nurse but was now left to die friendless, was moaning and groaning with rheumatism, scolding and grumbling at the boy so that he was afraid to go near her corner. He got a drink of water in the outer room, but could not find a crust anywhere, and had been on the point of waking his mother a dozen times. He felt frightened at last in the darkness. It had long been dusk, but no light was kindled. Touching his mother's face, he was surprised that she did not move at all, and that she was cold as the wall. It is very cold here, he thought. He stood a little, unconsciously letting his hand rest on the dead woman's shoulders, and then he breathed on his fingers to warm them, and then quietly fumbling for his cap on the bed, he went out the cellar. He would have gone earlier, but was afraid of the big dog which had been howling all day at the neighbour's door at the top of the stairs. But the dog was not there now, and he went out onto the street. Mercy on us, what a town! He had never seen anything like it before. In the town from which he had come, it was always such black darkness at night. There was one lamp for the whole street. The little low-pitched wooden houses closed up the shutters. There was no one to be seen in the street after dusk. All the people shut themselves up in their houses, and there was nothing but howling packs of dogs, hundreds of thousands of them barking and howling all night. But there it was so warm, and he was given food. While here, oh dear, if he only had something to eat. And what a noise and rattle here! What light and what people, horses and carriages, and what a frost! The frozen steam hung in clouds over the horses, over their warmly breathing mouths. Their hoofs clanged against the stones through the powdery snow, and everyone pushed so, and oh dear, how he longed for some morsel to eat, and how wretched he suddenly felt. A policeman walked by, and he turned away to avoid seeing the boy. Here was another street. Oh, what a wide one, where he could run over for certain. How everyone was shouting, racing and driving along. And the light! And what was this? A huge glass window, and through the window a tree reaching up to the ceiling. It was a fir tree, and on it were ever so many lights, gold papers and apples and little dolls and horses, and there were children clean and dressed in their best running about the room, laughing and playing and eating and drinking something. And then a little girl began to dance with one of the boys. What a pretty little girl! And he could hear music through the window. The boy looked and wondered and laughed, though his toes were aching with the cold and his fingers were red and stiff so that it hurt him to move them. And all at once the boy remembered how his toes and fingers hurt him, and began crying and ran on, and again through another window pane he saw another Christmas tree, and on the table cakes of all sorts, almond cakes, red cakes and yellow cakes, and 3 grand young ladies were sitting there, and they gave the cakes to anyone who went up to them, and the door kept opening. Lots of gentlemen and ladies went in from the street. The boy crept up, suddenly opened the door and went in. Oh, how they shouted at him and waved him back. One lady went up to him hurriedly and slipped a kopeck in his hand, and with her own hands opened the door into the street for him. How frightened he was, and the kopeck rolled away and clinked upon the steps. He could not bend his red fingers to hold it tight. The boy ran away and went on. Where, he did not know. He was ready to cry again, but he was afraid, and ran on and blew his fingers. And he was miserable, because he felt suddenly so alone and terrified, when all at once, mercy on us, What was this again? People were standing in the crowd admiring. Behind a glass window there were 3 little dolls dressed in red and green dresses, and exactly as though they were alive. One was a little old man sitting and playing a big violin. The 2 others were standing close by and playing little violins and nodding in time and looking at one another, and their lips moved. They were speaking, actually speaking, only one you couldn't hear through the glass. And at first the boy thought they were alive, and when he grasped that they were dolls he laughed. He had never seen such dolls before, and he had no idea there were such dolls. And he wanted to cry, but he felt amused by the dolls. And all at once he fancied that someone had caught his smoke behind, a wicked big boy that was standing beside him, and suddenly hit him on the head, snatched off his cap and tripped him up. The boy fell down on the ground. At once there was a shout. He was numb with fright. He jumped up and ran away. He ran, and not knowing where he was going, ran in the gate of someone's courtyard and sat down behind a stack of wood. They won't find me here, besides it's dark. He sat huddled up and was breathless from fright, and all at once, quite suddenly, he felt so happy. His hands and his feet, suddenly left off aching, grew so warm as though he were on a stove. Then he shivered all over, then gave a start. Why, he must have been asleep. How nice to have a sleep here. I'll sit here a little and go and look at the dolls again, said the boy, and smiled, thinking of them, just as though they were alive. And suddenly he heard his mother singing over him, "Mammy, I am asleep. How nice it is to sleep here." "Come to my Christmas tree, little one," a soft voice whispered over his head. He thought that this was still his mother, but no, it was not she. Who it was calling him he could not see, but someone bent over and embraced him in the darkness, and he stretched out his hands to him, and all at once, oh, what a bright light! Oh, what a Christmas tree! And yet it was not a fir tree. He had never seen a tree like that. Where was he now? Everything was bright and shining, and all around him were dolls. But no, they were not dolls. They were little girls and boys, only so bright and shining. They all came flying around him. They all kissed him and took him and carried him along with them, and he was flying himself. And he saw that his mother was looking at him and laughing joyfully. "Mummy, Mummy, oh, how nice it is here, Mummy." And he kissed the children and wanted to tell them at once of those dolls in the shop window. "Who are you, boys? Who are you, girls?" he asked, laughing and admiring them. "This is Christ's Christmas tree," they answered. "Christ always has a Christmas tree on this day for the little children who have no tree on their own." And he found out that all these little boys and girls were children just like himself, that some had been frozen in the baskets in which they had as babies been laid on the doorstep of well-to-do Petersburg people. Others had been boarded out with Finnish women by the foundling and had been suffocated. Others had died at their starved mother's breasts. Others had died in the third-class railway carriages from the foul air. And yet they were all here. They were all like angels about Christ, and he was in the midst of them, and he held out his hands to them and blessed them and their sinful mothers. As the mothers of these children stood on one side weeping, each one knew her boy or girl, and the children flew up to them and kissed them, and wiped away their tears with their little hands, and begged them not to weep because they were so happy. And down below in the morning, Porter found the dead little boy of a frozen child on the wood stack. They sought out his mother too. She had died before him. They met before the Lord God in heaven. Why have I made up such a story, so out of keeping with an ordinary diary, and a writer's above it all? And I promised 2 stories dealing with real events. But that is just it. I keep fancying that all this may have happened really. That is, what took place in the cellar and on the wood stack. But as for Christ's Christmas tree, I cannot tell you whether that could have happened or not. End of The Heavenly Christmas Tree by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Guys, thanks for coming. And don't forget, 1 o'clock is karaoke Christmas. Guys, see you at 1 o'clock. You have a nice morning and Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you.